Route 22 had always been a ghost story people told late at night, but I never believed in any of it. People said the road was cursed, that those who traveled it would disappear, never to be seen again. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd laugh off over a beer, except for the fact that more than a dozen people had actually vanished. I was a journalist, tasked with investigating the disappearances. At first, I thought it would be just another unsolved mystery to file away. But when I stood on that empty stretch of road, I could feel it, the weight of something watching, waiting. The trees were dense, and the road seemed to stretch on forever, no sign of life for miles. I started driving, following the last known route of Greg Jensen, one of the many who had gone missing. His car had been found just off Route 22, abandoned with the keys still in the ignition. The deeper I drove, the more I realized something was wrong. My phone had lost signal, the GPS had stopped working, and the radio was filled with static. The silence was thick, pressing in on me. That's when I saw it, the road sign. Faded, barely legible, no exit. I pulled over, my heart racing. The sign couldn't have been real. No exit? Where was I? I got out of the car, but the air felt wrong, too still, too cold. I checked the area where Greg's car had been found, but there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no tracks. Just emptiness. That's when I heard the noise, soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. Then it grew louder, more insistent, a strange, rhythmic hum coming from the trees. I turned toward the sound, but the forest was too thick to see anything. As I stepped closer, I saw something, a figure, standing just beyond the tree line. It was watching me, its outline barely visible in the fading light. My heart pounded in my chest. I called out, but it didn't move. I took a step back, and suddenly it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. I ran back to my car, slamming the door shut. But as I drove away, I realized something terrifying: the road didn't look the same anymore. The trees were different, and there were no familiar landmarks. It was like I had driven into another world. I kept driving, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The road stretched out endlessly, twisting and turning, but there was no end in sight. My gas gauge was nearly empty, and I hadn't passed another car or a house in hours. The static on the radio grew louder, filling the car with a droning hum that rattled my bones. I tried turning it off, but the sound wouldn't stop. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore, it was coming from the road itself. That's when I saw the lights. Headlights, up ahead, barely visible through the mist. I sped up, desperate to catch up to whoever was in front of me, but no matter how fast I drove, the lights stayed the same distance away. I was trapped, caught in a loop. Every turn felt like the last, the same trees, the same bends in the road, repeating over and over. And the static, it was deafening now, filling my head, making it hard to think. Then the lights disappeared, and I was alone again. The car ran out of gas just as the sun began to set, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I got out, the silence pressing down on me, heavier than before. That's when I saw them. Figures, moving through the trees, just at the edge of my vision. They didn't move like people, more like shadows, slipping between the trees without making a sound. I shouted, but there was no response. The shadows grew closer, circling me, watching. My chest tightened with fear. I tried to run, but no matter where I went, the road stretched out before me. I wasn't escaping, I was being herded. The figures never touched me, but they didn't have to. Their presence was suffocating, a cold, empty dread that seeped into my bones. I felt them, felt their hunger, their need to pull me deeper into the darkness. And then, without warning, they were gone, vanishing into the trees like smoke. I was alone again. But I knew now, I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. I don't remember when I stopped trying to escape. The days blurred together, and the road never ended. I wandered, aimless, until I found something. It was a clearing, just off the side of the road, hidden by the trees. In the center was an old, dilapidated shack. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. Inside, the walls were covered with names. Dozens of them, scratched into the wood, each one marked with a date. The most recent was Greg Jensen's name, dated 2 years ago. But there was another name scratched underneath his. My name. And the date, it was today. I don't remember how I got out. One minute I was in that shack, staring at my name, and the next I was back on Route 22, standing beside my car. It was still out of gas, but the road was different now. The trees didn't seem so thick, and the air wasn't as heavy. I looked at my phone, there was a signal. It had been a week since I disappeared. Or so I thought. When I finally made it home, I found out the truth. It wasn't a week. It was 2 years. 2 years had passed since I drove down Route 22. I had been gone, lost to everyone who knew me. I didn't understand it. I still don't. To me, it felt like no time at all, but to the world, I was just another person who had vanished without a trace. 2 years later, I was back, but I wasn't the same. I couldn't stop thinking about the others, the people whose names were scratched into the walls of that shack. The world had moved on without me, but I hadn't moved on from Route 22. I knew the road was still out there, waiting. I knew that more people would disappear, just like I did. Sometimes I dream about the figures in the trees, the shadows that watched me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain that they're still there, waiting for me to return. I never went back to Route 22. I promised myself I wouldn't. But every now and then, when I'm alone, I hear the static again, the same low hum that filled the road that day. And I know that one day, it will call me back.